Welcome to LegacyCast, your source for hearing from top influencers, industry experts, and successful business owners who are telling their unique story about life, values, goals, business strategies, and the various causes they are so passionate about. Future generations will come to be impacted by what is happening today, whether positive or negative, and our mission is to focus on what is going to affect change for the better. Hosted each weekday by James Snow, a former U.S. Army combat medic, now founder and principal advisor of James Advisors Group, a full-service financial planning firm in North Texas. This is LegacyCast. Welcome, LegacyCast listeners. This is your host, James Snow, welcoming you to the program LegacyCast, where we welcome people from around the world, quite literally sometimes, that they come to our program to talk about what matters in their world and what their vision of building a legacy is. It's oftentimes their story told their way, and that story we want to be heard for many generations from now. And so it's having that conversation of what are you doing to make sure that story is heard. It's making sure that multiple generations behind us know what you cared about, what you're passionate about, what you're involved in, what your beliefs were, even to the spiritual beliefs many times, how that works in. And so, legacy isn't just a financial conversation. It's a big, all-encompassing conversation. And I like to look at it as a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle of being very deliberate and intentional. And so, here today I have a wonderful gentleman, Paul Moore, coming to me from Virginia. And Paul is in a fairly parallel space, I would say, to what I do. He does understand the wealth concepts and what have you. And so I'd like to, without further ado, welcome Paul into the program and get some words from him. Welcome to the program, Paul.
Hey, thanks, James. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure, as always. And you're enjoying the temperatures there in Virginia. We're cooking in Texas. I think we're somewhere between.
You're like over 100, aren't you?
Yeah, on average. I think maybe today we'll get up to about 130 or something. And so keep your pets indoors, because otherwise they will be barbecue and jerky later on.
It's pretty warm here, but I can't complain. My son and I were in Northwest Ontario fishing a few weeks ago, and this was in mid-August. And it actually hit 103 our second day there. But you know what? We had a great time. There was no air conditioning, but there was a great breeze, and it was a wonderful time. I don't know if you've ever been up fishing in places like that, but that's one of the things, as far as me leaving a legacy, I try to take very, sometimes expensive, but fun and memorable trips with each of my 4 kids. So Ontario is my son's favorite place to go. We've been there 4 times.
Sounds like a very exciting and wonderful trip. And I'm glad that you mentioned that you look at that as part of the legacy, because memories are a very good example of putting into your legacy. It's what do you leave behind, because obviously we can't take anything with us when we're through with these bodies. And so it's what are we doing that's really going to be tangible. It's kind of like throwing the pebble into the pond and what ripples are created. It's creating lots and lots and lots of ripples that keep going through the ages. And so when you're thinking about legacy, though, in a higher level thought, what comes to mind for you, Paul?
I was telling my son this morning, he was actually kind of discouraged that he hadn't run for class president in his college class. It's a real small class, but because his professors expected him to, he's top of his class. And I said, what's going to matter more at the end of your life is how you made people feel. I said, there's a title and there's a testimony. Pharaoh had a title, but Moses had a testimony. And the governor of Alabama, George, darn it, he had a title. George Wallace had a title, but Martin Luther King Jr. had a testimony. And I said, you don't have to have a title to make people feel great. People think that we're at the end of our lives, we're going to be just a pile of bones buried 6 feet down, but that's not true. James, we're going to be remembered by our stories. And the story that we're writing today is going to be remembered and hopefully told by our children and grandchildren and others in the future. So the question I have for myself today is, am I writing a story today that's worthy of the person that I've been called to be? And that's what I want to do. And that's the kind of thing I try to think about every day.
It's very well put. And, with what you were saying, it's kind of, I'm hearing in my mind is sort of the motto for my personal business is Proverbs 13:22, which, we're called to create a legacy for our children and our children's children. And, you're talking very, very directly about that, that's something that, you set out each morning, with that as a focus.
Right. I want my kids, and it's part of my declarations in the morning. I say, I want to see a person. I want my kids to see a person that was burning with passion, a man that was set on fire, doing everything he was called to do, and loving them and loving their mom in the process as well. So yeah, that's great. I'm glad that that's your motto. That's awesome.
And I have a mentor that would say, leave nothing in the tank. At the end of every day, send a memo, an email to everybody. And at the very close of the email was always, did you leave anything in the tank? And,
nice.
That's just kind of a reminder that, we're called to really do 110% every day.
Yeah. Right? Awesome.
It's kind of a nice reminder that I get from him.
Leave nothing in the tank. That's good stuff.
So do you feel like people should, more people should deliberately and intentionally consider what their legacy is? That enough people are doing that, or do you feel like maybe enough people are not doing that?
Oh, I think that more people, I think from 30, 40 years ago when I started in business to now, I think more and more people are talking about it. I actually was in your fine city in the Cowboys Stadium in the mid-90s where Tom Landry and other people got up at an event called Promise Keepers, and they talked about leaving a legacy. They talked about, working a few less hours and spending more time and being more intentional with our kids. Lee Iacocca, the chairman of Chrysler, said, and it is reported at least to have said, on their deathbed, no one ever said, I wish I'd have spent more hours at work. And right. I wasn't hearing a whole lot of that when I was really young, but I'm hearing more and more people, and I'm seeing more people who are dedicated to that kind of thing now. At the same time, James, I've got a problem. And, you can see me on the screen here, and this is a big problem for me. This phone, I have a laptop and a phone, and it is easy. It is incredibly easy to work almost, every waking hour. And I am tempted as an entrepreneur. They say entrepreneurs have it great. We have the freedom to work any 80 hours a week we choose. And I don't want it said at the end of my life, my dad worked 80 hours a week as an entrepreneur. He never slowed down. Well, and I'm tempted to do that. And I've spent many 80-hour weeks. But, with all the freedom we have, with all the connectivity we have, I just sent you an email right before the show started, and you had it in 2 different places within seconds. And, it's easy for me to send an email to my assistant at 9 p.m. And when I'm going to bed at 11 p.m., checking to see if he replied. When in history, I don't know about history, but when in the past have people been expected to answer an email at 9 or 10 or 11 p.m. at night and keep working? So I think it's a real temptation and a real problem. And I've actually been reading the book that I think that you're probably aware of. Fellow Texan Gary Keller wrote, called The One Thing. And the book is teaching you to focus on one thing at a time. And if you're all in with your family, you're all in. And if you're all in at work, you're all in. And it's so easy. So many of us have home offices now. So many of us carry our laptop home if we don't. It's easy to not be all in and to be divided and multitasking. And we think we can multitask, but there are so many studies. There's so much information now saying it's damaging, it's bad, it hurts your productivity. And I'm trying to break a lifelong habit. I used to brag about being a multitasker, and now I kind of hate it.
Yeah, I'm certainly not a multitasker.
Good.
The way I look at that is, you have 100% of yourself, and if you have 5 different things going on, then basically you have 20% of yourself going to each of those 5 things. And so
Right.
I try to remember, if I have multiple things going on, then that's really what's happening.
And the
I'm
switching cost.
dividing it up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you're dividing it up, and there's a switching cost. They say if you take your eyes off a book you're reading, it takes you like half a second to get back to right where you were. Well, add that up hundreds of times a day, and it really adds up. But
Sure.
it's more than that. I mean, sometimes I have to go back and read the last paragraph or even page. That's
Absolutely.
pretty rough. And right before this podcast started, I got bombarded with texts from people, and I was trying to finish a task. And all those texts seem urgent, right? And those people expected me to answer. Well, I wasn't able to finish what I was working on. And I'm frankly a little frustrated about that. But hey, I'm the one that had my phone on. I'm the one that had that little ding on there, I didn't have to answer any of those, but they seemed urgent. And it's important to learn that's part of our legacy too, and understand the difference between the urgent and the truly important. We could probably talk about that all day, and you're aware of it too.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and the shiny object syndrome, that's a huge one. So
Right.
If you're thinking about your business, the different businesses that you have going, because you're not only involved in your particular primary business, but also are an author, and so having a book out there. When you're looking at your business from the CEO standpoint, are there a few things that maybe keep you up at night still that you're concerned about business wise, or are you pretty calm with that direction?
I was $2.5 million in debt in 2008, and I don't ever remember laying awake more than 5 minutes about that. So I don't stay up at late. I don't lay awake much on too many things. I guess one thing is every time we raise money for a new deal, if we have a commitment and a very tight timeline, let's say we're buying a multifamily facility. So in other words, an apartment complex. And I remember having to raise $3.8 million for one once and having a very short timeline. And I was frankly pretty nervous, and I was laying awake at night. So I guess that would be it. Day to day, there's nothing really that is causing me great concern, but I do try to not worry about those type of things. And I think it comes fairly natural to me. I'm really driven, but I don't tend to worry about things too much.
And you were mentioning something just a second ago, being $2 million in debt. Do you mind, kind of talking about that? Because a lot of our listeners are probably, staring, hopefully not at that large of a number, but still staring at a number that feels, it feels that large. So maybe, kind of talk to us about, that,
right?
Going from, I believe, before we came on the podcast, you said 2 million in the black to 2 million in the red. So, kind of talk about that.
Yeah. So I quit Ford Motor Company after about 5 years, and I started my own company with a friend, and we happened to be in this great industry that was, you may remember the company out of Houston, Texas, called Administaff. It's called a PEO, Professional Employer Organization. Well, that's the business we were in. And it became very popular right around the time that we decided to sell the company. And so we actually were able to sell the company. I put about $1.9 million in my pocket, and I moved to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. And I found dozens of ways to waste that money, dozens of ways to confuse investing with speculating. And I mean, I invested well sometimes, but I speculated more often and lost a lot of money. And I've got all kinds of stories. I don't know if I told you, James, I have a podcast called How to Lose Money. And so on that show, we talk to various entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs about their past painful loss lessons of how they lost money in this, that, or the other. And almost everybody, well, actually everybody we've ever spoken to, we have over 130 episodes, has a painful story of loss. And I certainly had mine. So we were in a great business. We were actually flipping houses. Then we started building houses. Then I did a small subdivision that was on hold when the recession hit, actually. We were flipping high-end waterfront lots at a resort lake in Virginia called Smith Mountain Lake. And everything seemed to be going well. Then this irritating Fortune magazine came out, and it said, the real estate bubble is about to burst. And I read that article, and of course, that Paul Simon and Garfunkel song, The Boxer, it says every man believes what he wants to believe and disregards the rest. Or actually says hears what he wants to hear. And I started doing that. So I started ignoring all the cracks in the foundation and all the stuff that was about to happen, like millions of others. But I found myself, when the market turned, we had a whole bunch of waterfront lots, including one that was an $860,000 5-acre lot that we had a lot of debt on. And we had $2.5 million in debt. That included my home and a vacation home and all the lots and everything else we had. And, we were in trouble. And my partner and I were splitting, for the most part, a lot of those interest payments going into late 2007. And he told me one day, he said, I can't continue to do this. I can't continue to have these massive interest payments. And so in about 2 months, in January 2008, I'm going to call it quits. I'm going to deed over those lots to you. And I just have to bow out. And I didn't actually get mad at him. We were good friends, and we're still good friends today. He still works with me, in fact, doing real estate work. But at any rate, I was in a pickle. So, James, I was sitting in my chair on a Sunday morning in November of 2007, if I remember. And I had this distinct impression, what would George Mueller do? Now, I don't know if you've heard of George Mueller, but George Mueller was a guy who was a pastor, and he lived almost all the way through the 1800s. And he was a hellion that turned into this great, wonderful pastor. And he was trying to convince the world that God could be trusted, and trying to leave a legacy. He was journaling incredibly, incredibly detailed journals of every penny he ever brought in, every prayer he prayed, and then when the prayers were answered, and he dated those. He was incredibly detailed, bean counter type pastor. Mm-hmm. And he actually tried to figure out what would be a place that I could demonstrate that God could be trusted, and that I don't have to worry about my money, and that I can leave this great legacy for the whole world to see. And so he had a big dream, right? And so he actually started opening orphanages. And over the course of many, many decades, George Mueller housed over 10,000 total orphans in his orphanages in Bristol, England. And, many of the listeners probably have heard this story, but he never told his staff, except once he slipped, he said. He never told anybody in the public how much money they needed to operate. He always just prayed. He always just trusted God. And one day they were, sitting at the breakfast table, and there's, I don't know how many, but let's say hundreds of orphans in this big breakfast hall. And they said, okay, we're going to say grace. We're going to thank God for the food. But there was no food. There was no food at all. And so they prayed. And right about that time, there was a knock on the door, and the bread wagon was outside. And the baker was at the door, and he said, I've been up since 2 a.m. baking bread for these orphans because I just sensed you were out of food. And so he gave them all this bread. And right about that time, there was another knock on the door, and it was the milk truck or the milk wagon. And the guy said, my wagon broke down right outside your door, and this milk's all going to go bad, so I'm just going to donate it to you and the orphans. And they had hundreds of stories like that he documented over these many years. And so back to my story. So I thought, what would George Mueller do? Number one, he wouldn't have been in debt at all, James. He wouldn't have been in debt. He was absolutely opposed to it. But the second thing I think he would have, the thing I think he would have done if he was in my shoes, I think he would have started giving. I think he would have started giving his way out of debt. So I had two friends who met with me at a Hardee's restaurant, or Carl's Jr. for those of you on the west side of the country. And they said, hey, you're probably going to have to declare bankruptcy here, right? I just can't keep going. I said, nope, I'm not going to. I'm going to give my way out of debt. They said, what? I said, I'm going to try. I don't know if it'll work, but I'm going to give my way out of debt. And I called my family together. I have 4 kids. And my wife and I said, we're going to give our way out of debt. I don't know if it'll work. It may or may not, but here we go. And so we started giving generously. January 1st, 2008. We started giving a set amount every week, not based on our income, not based on our bank account. We just said, we're going to give as if we were making, and I estimated, about $500,000 a year. Well, 4 weeks later, I was at a Subway restaurant, and I met a real estate developer there who I knew, but not real well. And I told him the pickle I was in with a subdivision that was on hold. And he said, hey, you really ought to try this certain strategy. And I said, yeah, that won't work. Here's why it won't work. And I told him why it wouldn't work. And he said, well, yeah, but you could turn that around and try it this way. And that was it. That's all he said. And it was like this massive light bulb from heaven went off in my head. And I said, oh my goodness, that could actually work. 2 days later, I was sitting with my surveyor in the county planning and zoning office, showing this plan to this lady, showing her why the rules that would not allow me to have a subdivision to divide this 5 acres into 5 waterfront lots, why the rules could actually be interpreted exactly the opposite so I could do it. And she looked up at me over her glasses. She said, I've been working here for decades. No one has ever come up with such a scheme, a harebrained scheme like this. And then she smiled and she said, but you're right. And I will approve this if you bring it to me. So the surveyor and I were stunned, and we celebrated, and we divided it up. But then the Great Recession hit, and we were selling these lots off right in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression. And guess what? We sold every one of those 5 lots off. We made $1.3 million. I was able to sell off other assets, and we were 100% debt-free, James, in 13 months.
Wow. That's incredible.
And you know what? I want to make a little caveat here. I don't think, that there's a vending machine in the sky, and I don't think that everybody who gives generously that'll happen for. I think it's going to be all individual. I don't know what'll happen if you give, and I don't think that would necessarily happen if I did it again. But I do know that there is a universal principle of giving and receiving, of sowing and reaping, and I know it'll work. I just don't know exactly how it'll work for everybody in particular. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's one of the great mysteries of life is how that does work, because when you do give sacrificially and without consideration for yourself, it seems to always come back. It's like you send your money out and they come back with friends. It's like the dollars come back with buddies, and I don't know how it works. I just know it does work. And I do have solid faith that God is involved in that and makes that work.
Right, it's true.
It's an incredible story you have there, Paul. So kind of to sum up, sort of some of what I was taking away from that is you during the course of that coming through that problem, you came up with a strategy to be able to fix it. With the help of someone who was sort of outside your circle. Came along, but it was important to have that strategy to get through it.
Right.
Do you think that more people should actually involve strategies in their daily and business lives than what they do now?
Oh, absolutely. So many of us, I've spent years, and one of the big mistakes I've made is I considered all tasks as equal. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I thought at the end of the day, and I literally thought this, I didn't just subconsciously think it. I thought I had a successful day. I got my inbox down from 119 to 72. And, that's not success. I mean, it could be, but that, if my success is keeping my inbox down, returning voicemails, doing little tasks, then what am I doing for the big goals that I have, the big strategies I have in this life? And I've told you about my big why in my life before. Well, what am I doing to accomplish that big why if I'm just answering, emails, keeping my inbox down to a low number and all that? So strategic thinking is considering all tasks as very much not equal. The problem is usually we go through this task list every day and we try to check off all these tasks, hoping that by the end of the day we'll have some time left to work on what's most important. Strategic thinking, as opposed to that, is actually scheduling in blocks of time to do what's very most important, what's going to help us accomplish our big someday goal, which means accomplishing our 5-year goal along the way, which means accomplishing our 1-year goal along the way, which means accomplishing things we need to, some mile markers we need to hit this month to get to those big goals. And so we start by scheduling those big things. We're thinking strategically, and we're working with the end in mind first rather than what is convenient for that day. And that is the kind of strategic thinking I'm trying to adopt into my life, in business, my family, etc. And that is, since I've been doing that, it's made a big, big difference.
Sure. And it's very valuable that you're putting that in there. Part of what I do with my practice is, it's the term, key progress indicators that, I'll set up a certain number of things that I need to do during the day that are money-making tasks, things that are going to forward, the business or move the needle a little bit in the right direction. And, doing those things first because, again, those shiny objects, the email, the text messages that come in, the organizing the papers that are at the end of your desk that are kind of annoying you, doing a little bit of filing and so forth. Those things aren't making money, but the other things are making money. And so, just making sure that you block in those things that really are important. And then, also blocking time for the necessary mundane things, but, staying within those boundaries is really the important thing. Right. So I suffer from that shiny object syndrome that I'm sitting here in this, squirrel, and I get completely drawn off by something that passes by me. And so I have to intentionally focus and keep.
It's very easy to do. Yeah. And it's important as we talk about leaving legacies, James, that we do that with our family as well. What do I need to do today, this week, this month, this year, to, at the end of my life, have a great marriage or have a great, legacy with my kids? And we can do that same kind of thinking by scheduling date nights with our spouse or with our kids. I took a date with my daughter this week. We actually went and had a wonderful dinner, and I think she's going to remember that for a long time. I hope she does. So those are the kind of strategic things we need to do with our family. Gary Keller says there's 7 different areas of life we need to think strategically in. And I'm going to name a few. It would be spiritual, family, other close relationships. I don't know that he breaks those down that way. Our finances, our business, our job, and I must have missed 1 or 2 more. But those are the type of things we need to break down. And I don't believe, I don't know what you think, James, but I don't believe in the hierarchy that many people talk about, which is for many people who are people of faith, that they'd say, okay, God first, family second. Is that right? Right. God first, family second. Some people would say things like church or nonprofit third, my job fourth, and everything else. I really don't believe that, because I actually believe that if we're people of faith and we believe in God, that loving God and receiving his love would mean that I'm all in on all those at any given time, but I'm in there at different times. So if I'm all in on this podcast, I'm not checking emails and texts while I'm doing it. If I'm all in with my family later, I'm doing that with all my heart. I'm doing whatever I'm doing at any given moment with all my heart. And that's a reflection of how we were created to be, how we were designed to be, and again, a way we're going to eventually leave a legacy.
Sure. Very well put there. Now, as far as for new entrepreneurs, there obviously are tons of reasons why they're giving up and failing. What are some of the main ones that you've seen in your experience, Paul?
So on this podcast, How to Lose Money, a lot of our seasoned entrepreneurs are telling stories about when they were a newbie or when they were a new entrepreneur. And I think that one thing that we've seen over and over is shiny object syndrome. People think, oh, this looks really good, and they'll chase it, and they won't give tremendous due diligence. So due diligence is, again, a related thing. People realize, that they probably should check this out a little closer, but it looks so good, and it's a limited time only, right? And we have to really chase this right now. And so I think I've found over the years, for example, I've wanted to start an additional podcast. I've actually been noodling this idea for over a year. That's not me. My normal way of doing things. I mean, I know how to do a podcast now. I've done 130 some of my podcast. Well, I'm thinking about starting another podcast in self-storage investing and another one in passive wealth generation, the secrets to passive wealth generation. And, I've spent about a year thinking about it. And I'm not saying I'm giving incredible due diligence to it, but I'm not rushing in. And I think rushing in is a big mistake new entrepreneurs make. Now, here's another thing we've learned from our How to Lose Money podcast, but I'm going to ask you and your audience to think about what the real lesson is here, because it could be two completely different lessons. So one is this: if you've made a ton of mistakes along the way, lost a lot of money, and ultimately failed in a business, one way to think about it is this: hey, you've already paid the tuition, so now get back up, get back in the ring, use all those years and all that money you've spent and that tuition you've spent, and now go back, get in there, you've learned what not to do. You know what you should have done. Now go in and do it, and now go make your millions. That's one way to think of it. Another person could say, you got to know when to cut your losses. If you have made a lot of mistakes along the way, and if you have lost a lot of money, you've got to know when to quit. And it's time, if it's time to quit, cut your losses, get out, don't lose another 100,000 in another 6 months of your life, but get out while you can. Now, which one of those is true? Well, James, I don't know which is true, because it's going to be different for different situations. One person in one situation might do A, another person might do B. And again, if you're a person of faith, maybe it's time for you to rely on the Holy Spirit to figure out which one is right for your situation. So James, hate to do this to you, but I'm going to throw it back on you real quick. If you had been pursuing this goal in this business and you've been at it, say 2 years, and you made some money, but then you just really tanked, you lost a lot of money, what would you generally think? Would you say, okay, it's time to cut my losses and get out? Or it's time to get back in the ring, use the lessons I've learned, and really do it right? What do you think there?
Well, in my particular scenario, I'm very much kind of a kick the door in sort of guy. So, my normal nature would say, I would be the one jump back in the ring and, just, learn from the failures, because, there is no success in, we don't learn success from our comfort zone. We learn success from being uncomfortable and from going through the failures. And so, taking those things and learning from them, and then jumping back in and moving forwards. And then obviously, it's weighing the odds though at the same time that, if it truly is something that, maybe you should cut your losses, that's a last resort always. But, typically I'm more of a burn my bridge kind of guy, to where, I don't leave, an alternative to what I'm trying to do 100%. So if I focus in on something, I'm focusing on that, and there is no other option.
Right. That's good. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And it was a little of an unfair question, because, James, it's not the same for everybody every time. Mm-hmm. So right. It depends on the situation. So when we started a wireless internet company a number of years ago, we realized that it was just a big mistake. There was all kinds of things we did wrong. We spent $392,000 launching this wireless internet company in North Dakota in 2011 with all this wonderful promise. And there were so many things that went wrong. Well, we knew after a number of years it was time to cut our losses, get out, and stay out. And that's what we did. Now, flipping houses, if I lost money on 2 or 3 flips, which I actually did, I learned exactly what I did wrong in those. And then,
Sure.
it was time to get back up, take those lessons and apply those and do something better. When we built a Hyatt hotel, actually my friend did, but I helped him out. I realized, okay, here's what we did wrong. Pretty serious mistakes here. Don't want to build another Hyatt hotel, but I want to get back in real estate development, but I want to do it differently now. And that's what we're doing. And we're seeing a lot of success in my 50s based on the failures of my 30s and 40s, if that makes sense.
Sure. And, ideally that's how it's going to happen is, we had the failures, but we should learn from them. And then, take those failures and turn it into successes. So what are some of the roadblocks, Paul, that you discovered in your years that you would maybe warn a new business person to look out for?
So one of the roadblocks is lack of capital. Almost everything we do takes twice as long and costs twice as much money to get going as we expect. And I'd hate to say half as profitable as we expect. The wireless internet company was a perfect example, but it's so painful. I don't think I want to get into it. So, but almost everything takes more money, more time, and we need to have a contingency plan for that. As an investor, and this, I think it applies to entrepreneurs as well, but as an investor, we need, typically, as an investor, we are optimists. As an entrepreneur, we certainly are optimists. We're an optimistic bunch, and we think things are going to go great, and we look at the best case scenario. But I think there are 3 questions we need to ask. Number 1, what is the upside? What could go right? How would it pan out if it went really well? That's 1. Less entrepreneurs ask question number 2, and investors as well. And that question number 2 is, what could go wrong? What would the downside be? What is the worst case scenario here and how much could it cost me? Less people ask that. But even less, and only usually the really seasoned entrepreneurs and investors ask question number 3. So question 1 is, what's the upside? Question 2, what's the downside? Question 3 is, can I handle it? Am I fully prepared to handle this worst case scenario? And as an investor and entrepreneur, we really need to learn to answer that question. And I'm actually learning that myself more and more. And I'm asking that question more. And I'm even telling my investors with Wellings Capital, I'm saying, as you consider how much you want to invest, even though the assets we invest in are low risk in general, you could lose all your principal, and that saying and all that. I say, look, as you consider how much you want to invest, consider that this money will be tied up perhaps much longer than you want it to be. Is that okay? Consider that we might lose it all. Okay. I mean, it hasn't happened, but if we did, would you be okay with that? Or would you at least be able to handle that loss? And those are the type of things that we really encourage our investor and entrepreneur friends to look at. Other roadblocks, other commitments, shiny object syndrome. Entrepreneurs by nature, that I guess some people say it only 7% of people were born and are bred as entrepreneurs. It seems to me, now I heard that statistic 31 years ago when I was getting my MBA. It seems to me there's a lot more than 7% of people entrepreneuring now. As a kid, I didn't know any entrepreneurs except the local pharmacist. And I didn't know anybody who worked out of their home office, not one person. But now I know dozens and dozens of people who work out of their home office and who are entrepreneurs. So it seems to me it's more than 7%. But like I said, we're optimists by nature. We tend to chase shiny objects. And it can be my friend Barry just ran for governor of Colorado, and he was unsuccessful in getting a nomination from his party. But he said in that process, he's rubbed shoulders with lots and lots of billionaires and very, very successful people. He said to me recently, he said, they're not much different from you and I. Similar education, similar degree, similar IQ. He said, but one thing's very different, and we're all in our 50s. And he said, they put their head down. They realized at a very young age what they wanted to do, and they put their head down and they stayed really, really committed to that one thing, year in, year out, decade in, decade out. And through that, they actually had tremendous success. And that is, I think, what a lot of entrepreneurs don't do. You know, serial entrepreneur, I've introduced myself as a serial entrepreneur for years. Is that really a badge of merit? Serial entrepreneurs, it's not necessarily a good thing. Maybe it would have been better if I just did one thing really, really well. I'll tell you this, if I would have known at 22 what I know now about commercial real estate investing, I could virtually guarantee if I would have had the sense and the discipline not to do anything else, I wouldn't have done anything else. I'm sure I'll be doing the same thing 10 or 20 years from now that I am now, because I know it, I understand it, I see the risks, I've experienced a lot of hurdles along the way, and this is what I really want to do. And over the years before, I would say, I'm doing this for now, but I might do something else next year. James, there was a year when we went to sell our company in 1997 that I was supposed to be marketing the heck out of that company, because we were going to get a payday in October of 97 based on how many clients and how much revenue we had. Well, guess what? I spent half of that year chasing another company on the side. I was spending a lot of my time trying to chase this other opportunity while I was supposed to be doing that final push to grow our company. We still grew the company a little, but you know what? I bet you I left $500,000 or more on the table just by that 6 months of chasing some shiny object. And frankly, it makes me sick. Gary Keller said, saying yes to one thing means saying no to 1,000 distractions. And I think it's actually more like 10,000. It means saying no. It means possibly irritating friends, irritating cohorts, irritating people by saying no to their great idea, or no to investing with them, or no to meeting them for lunch once a week. Sometimes you have to do that to keep your head down, stay focused. And sometimes that makes for some awkward situations. It means emails aren't answered quickly. It means all kinds of things. But you know what? I think that is probably the number one deterrent to great success, and that is not staying focused on one thing, but instead, like you said, chasing shiny objects.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of resources have you run across that you would like to tell the listeners to look out for, keep their eyes open for different good resources?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm involved in real estate investing, and so we really love the massive forum of over 1 million strong now. It's called Bigger Pockets, and so biggerpockets.com is a great real estate investing website. I mentioned it earlier, but the book called The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, they not only have a book, but they're actually building a community of people. And I'm spending a mere $30 a month to be part of that community. And I'm learning, I'm watching webinars, I went through training, and I'm using some of the products and systems that they put out to teach me to focus on that one thing. And that's how important it is. It's the first thing scheduled in my calendar every week to do my one thing training and my one thing scheduling for the week. So that is a great resource. Podcasts in general, of course, your listeners are listening to a podcast, so they probably know that. I didn't really know the value of podcasts till about 2 years ago. And I wish I'd have known over this last decade or more, the tremendous value of podcasts. I mean, you can listen to an author on a podcast and get the main points of his book. I've listened to authors, and I got so excited. I went and bought the book, and I realized later, at the end of reading the book, I didn't really get any more out of that whole book than I did that 1 hour podcast. So I think that's a great benefit. And I think what you're doing, your legacy podcast, I think it's phenomenal. I think it's a great resource for people to consider, how to financially plan, and how to leave a legacy in the future. So hats off to you, my friend.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and obviously, your book is also a resource that I think people should look into. It was titled Perfect Investment. Is that correct?
Yeah, my book is, it was going to be called, it was going to be called The Definitive Guide to Multifamily Investing. And everybody was yawning over that title, and I thought it was pretty good. But a friend of mine said, multifamily investing, as I'm skimming your draft of your book, it seems like the perfect investment. Why don't you just call it that? And so it's called The Perfect Investment, Create Enduring Wealth from the Historic Shift to Multifamily Housing. And the book looks at the demographic trends that are making multifamily housing a great investment. It's the balance of risk, the balance of reward, the stability of this asset class, why the demographics show that for decades in front of us, multifamily will be a great investment. And like I said, I call it the perfect investment. It's got 4.6. The Sharpe ratio is a measure of return versus risk in various asset classes. So it's the return divided by the risk, which is the instability, if you will, the ups and downs of that market. Multifamily is 4.6 times better than the S&P 500 and some of the Dow Jones and some of the other stock indices. And it's actually like 1.5 times better than private equity and other commercial asset classes. So that's why I called it the perfect investment. But the caveat is, the disclaimer, I guess, is the perfect investment, James, is not so perfect when you can't find any deals. And here we are in the summer of 2018. It's very, very hard to find multifamily deals that make sense. It's very hard to find apartments, even duplexes. People buying 1 or 2 units are having a hard time finding rental housing that makes sense. And so people are going to extreme lengths, and they're sometimes overpaying. And that's not a perfect investment at all. And so we love multifamily. The problem is a whole lot of other people do too. So we're actually branching out into self-storage right now, and it has a lot of similarities to multifamily, but it's got some great benefits that multifamily, unfortunately, doesn't have right now. And I'm a multifamily investor. I love it. But self-storage has some great benefits right now, and at least in 2018.
Good information there. Now, with your business, with both of us, obviously being people of faith, how do you incorporate that into your business to make that work?
I feel like God must, if he is God, and since he's God, he probably has the best ideas in the world for any problem in the world. And that was a new idea to me a couple of years ago, but I just realized, yeah, he probably has answers for my problems. I spent years, James, decades as a Christian thinking that I was inferior. I thought, missionaries are way up here, and then pastors and elders are here, and then way down here is these business people, these greedy business people. And I thought I was one of those greedy business people. And I felt I had this nagging thought that, well, if I was really spiritual, I would be one of those guys. Or if I was really spiritual, I'd give away 100% of my money. But yeah, I got this house, and I got this office, and I got this car. Well, I just felt like I was compromising all the time. And I didn't realize that this problem I had for these decades was right here between my ears. The problem was right in my head, because actually I think business people, if it's important to me, it's important to God. And I think God gives business people a wider platform, especially us that have podcasts and write books and blogs. We have a bigger platform than most pastors in the world to reach the world. And so I think that God is going to use us to solve different problems, sometimes more problems than people in the pulpit or people in the mission field we're in a mission field. You know, when I became a Christian, I became a full-time Christian on that day. And so sometimes, you know, I carry around these, and you can see me on video. I carry around these $2 bills, and I give them out to people quite frequently in public, not only to, you know, McDonald's drive-through clerks or whatever, but I give them out to kids and other people, and they say, "Oh, are you a pastor?" I said, "No, I'm just a full-time Christian." And they look at me a little funny, and I just say, "No, I just, you know, I'm all in. I just love God, and I want to see you know the love that God has for you." And I can do that in all kinds of different contexts in business. And I think God cares about that a lot. You know, I think I can touch a lot more people outside the four walls of the church than most people can within those four walls. And so I believe that if God, and since God is a supernatural God, he has answers to all the worst problems in the world. Like I said, he's got answers to crime and pollution and global warming, if that's true, and all this stuff. He's got answers to all those. And I think it's incumbent upon us as believers to be in touch with God to get those answers. I don't think I should just be thinking about, you know, spiritual things in church or spiritual times when I'm reading my Bible, but I should be actually thinking about those type of solutions and those type of connections. I should be making those kind of connections all the time and looking for answers to problems at my apartment complex, looking for answers to problems like how to find an apartment complex to buy. And I should be expecting that God cares about all that. And so as a believer, I'm looking for answers. And I don't know if you have a second here, but I'll tell you a quick story. There's now I'm forgetting the exact town, but there's a town in South America, and I think I'll think of it before I'm done. But they were rampant. It was rampant with alcoholism, drug addiction, divorce, all these problems. And the productivity from this town, this small town, was really, really low. Like they would send one truck every 2 weeks, I think, of vegetables. They would ship them out from this village into the nearby town. They had 2 prisons in that town, and they were both full, so full that they had to send prisoners out to other cities. Well, one day, a farmer who was almost murdered, he actually put a stake in the ground and he said, "I'm sick of all this. I'm sick of the divorce and addictions and all these mess and all these terrible things that are happening here. I'm going to do something about it." And he called together some other farmers, and they began to pray. And they began to really pray and ask God not just to grow their church building or grow their church, but they said, let's have solutions for the land. The land is hardly producing any crops. And there's all this rampant, horrible addictions and divorce. And let's pray for all this to be healed. We think God's got answers for all this. All these things. It was Almalanga, Guatemala, by the way. Almalanga is the town. And so anyway, they started praying, and guess what, James? God healed their land. I'm not kidding. So first of all, the people began to drink less. The drug addiction, the drug abuse went down. The divorce and the abuse inside homes, the domestic abuse started plummeting. And these people began to see that God was on the move. There are pictures from Almalanga where there are carrots as long as my forearm, okay? And they started producing. The ground was healed. God healed their land. And that's actually a biblical concept from the Old Testament, by the way. God healed their land. They began to produce 2 or 3 or 4 crops a year instead of like one. Instead of shipping 1 truck full of vegetables to town every 2 weeks, now they started shipping, I think it was 10 trucks per week to town, 40 truckloads a month, if I'm not mistaken, of vegetables. And so God healed the land, God healed the people, God healed a solution. And now scientists and agriculturalists, is that a word, who are traveling from all over the world to Almalanga, and they're trying to figure out what is the answer. Why are you producing these huge carrots, and why are you producing all extra harvests per year? And the answer that they get is not satisfying to them because they didn't expect to hear that. But God healed their land. Well, guess what? God wants to heal your land as well, James. God wants to heal your financial planning, your clients' financial planning situations. God wants to heal stuff in my marriage and my family and my town of Lynchburg and Roanoke, Virginia. We've got all kinds of problems. Well, we should be the answer to those problems. You know that Dallas-Fort Worth, from what I've heard, has the highest concentration of churches in America, but they also have very high crime and they have all kinds of other problems that, you know, it shouldn't be when there's that many Christians getting together to pray. They should be providing solutions. I'm not bashing people of faith or Christians and all that, but I am saying that we should have solutions for the problems that the world has. And then maybe, just maybe, the world will want to listen to us when we talk about Jesus and we talk about God's plan for their life, because they'll see God's plan is already working. There's a church in Redding, California called Bethel. And Bethel Church in Redding, California, they're actually providing solutions like this to their local school district. You may recall that Redding had a huge fire there just a month ago. 1,000, 2,000 buildings in the town, including a lot of homes, got burned down. Bethel's out there providing solutions. They're providing plans. They're actually donating some of the offerings, some of the budget from the church to the local police and fire departments to help them get enough equipment to do their jobs well. That is a church that's taking this seriously. And man, if the tens of thousands of other churches and the millions of people who, you know, are believers in the United States, around the world, would think that way, our businesses would be healed, our land would be healed, our lives would be healed. This would be a different place. Heaven would come to earth, which is what Jesus prayed.
And just kind of tie that part, what you're just saying here, together with something you were saying earlier, is, you know, everything that we have, you know, we're stewards of these things. It doesn't belong to us. We're just stewards for the short term. And so, you know, when you're stewards of little, then God will give you much. And
Right.
So the more we use that stewardship, then, you know, it comes to us. We have those things to be able to bless other people, and
Right.
You know, blessed people will bless more people. And so it just keeps creating a compounding effect. So, you know, having a successful business, you know, is a great thing, because that shows that God has blessed you, but you have a responsibility. And that responsibility is to take that and use it, you know, for the community and for those around you. Like you're saying, with the church in California, helping with all those different organizations, you know, they had been blessed, and so they were in turn blessing other people, and it reciprocates. When you put that goodness out there, it comes back to you.
Right. Very true.
And, you know,
I love it.
It's what, and that's like I said earlier, it's one of those things you just can't explain. But some things aren't meant to be explained. You know, our minds can't comprehend everything. So.
Right. Well, if we could comprehend all those things, then we would have to be God ourselves, right?
That's true. So to kind of wind out our time that we have today here, I have a little bit of a trivia question for you, which I like to ask people. and that's, can you tell me something about you, Paul, that most other people don't know?
That's a good question. You know, I'm struggling trying to figure out which one. I'm a really, really open book. And so I lead small groups in my community, in my church. And, you know, they go really well. Typically my wife cringes because I'm like, yeah, we've got my wife and I were just fighting right before this meeting. And so I guess one thing is that, I have a really, really deep passion. I had 2 family members that were victims of sexual crimes against them. And I've seen the devastation that this has caused to them. And not only for that reason, but for other reasons, I am dedicating a lot of my future years, current and future years, to fighting human trafficking and rescuing its victims. Did you know that, James, if you took the record profits, not the normal profits, the record annual profits of Apple, Nike, General Motors, and Starbucks, combine those into one number, and you doubled that number, that would be the approximate estimated annual revenues generated by human trafficking. This is a tragedy. And James, I want to believe that if I was alive in the 1850s, I would have been an abolitionist fighting against slavery. And I want to believe that if I was an adult in the 1960s, I would have been fighting for civil rights. Well, we have a human crisis. We have a slave crisis on our hands right now. We've got 25 to 35 million people enslaved around the world, and it's happening in Dallas, and it's happening in Virginia, and it's happening all over the world. And this $250 million revenue stream, a $250 billion revenue stream, is horrifying. But let's boil it down to one person. Did you know that the traffickers can make a revenue of up to $500,000 a year from one girl? Now think about the devastation to that girl. Think about the toll that takes on one girl. I saw the toll from one or two horrible events that happened to my family members. I can't even imagine the toll it's taking on them. So my goal is to raise $1 billion and hopefully a lot more of that in the rest of my life. I'm 54 years old. I figure I got 46 years left to work and to live till I'm 100. And so I'm trying to raise $1 billion or more to fight human trafficking and rescue its victims. One way we're doing that is we've got a new organization called Freedom Place, and you can go to freedomplaceproject.com. There's no money to give, and we're not asking for anything from anybody, but freedomplaceproject.com is showing our plan to build $1 billion office facility in Metro Dallas. And then we want to give 100% of the developer profits to fight human trafficking and rescue its victims. And we want to use that, James, as a prototype for doing that again and again in various cities around the country. So my company, Wellings Capital, is dedicating a lot of our resources and our future profits, and of course our influence as podcasters, bloggers, and authors to trying to fight this great evil.
Great. A good project that you have going there. So, Paul, if you could give us just kind of a rundown of the different ways to contact you, because the listeners are one way or another going to want to reach out to you and be able to plug into either the real estate investment that you're doing with multifamily, or with the Freedom Play project that you're talking about, any of the other things with Wellings Capital.
Yeah, so absolutely. So they can buy my book on Amazon. It's called The Perfect Investment. They can also reach out to me at my website. My company is Wellings Capital. That's WELLINGS capital.com. And you can email me, paul@wellingscapital.com. And you can also check out our podcast, How to Lose Money, and you can look at that at howtolosemoney.com.
Okay, Paul. There's some good information there, and enjoyed the time that we had together today to be able to get to know each other and to be able to talk about what you're doing to create a mark and to leave that lasting influence on other people, because truth be told, we leave an influence one way or the other, and so it's good to know people that are leaving a positive one, rather than negative ones. So it's been a pleasure having you on today.
Thanks, James. I really enjoyed it. And again, I really appreciate what you're doing. And I really hope that your listeners appreciate all the time and effort and money you've spent to make this legacy message go out, hopefully around the world. So again, thank you for having me on. It's been an honor.
Thank you, sir. And like I say to all of my guests, I will see you around the bend, my friend. You've been listening to Legacy Cast. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to come back next time as we speak with more top influencers, industry experts, and business owners from around the world.